if your sugar is 4 calories per gram, but your gut's not touching it, it kind of makes it around 5 calories per gram if you do the math. Hello, my name is Shay. I'm a nutritionist and a international level athlete, and today we're talking about a bit of a crash course to losing weight, not to be confused with a crash diet, but we're gonna quickly go over everything you really need to know if you're trying to lose weight in a methodical way and not just trying to make yourself miserable and not eat at all. So let's get started. So the first thing you're gonna have to understand is the calories in, calories out thing. You know, you see some people saying, oh, it's not that simple. It kind of is. The complicated part is the calories out. That relies on a lot of factors, but it doesn't mean we can't find what your calorie output is. So basically, the best way to find where your maintenance is, which means where your calorie output equals input, you know, a calorie balance, the best way I think is to track your calories alongside your weight. And when, let's say you're eating 3,000 calories a day, and let's say your weight is stable across a couple weeks, that means that's going to be your maintenance. And of course, day by day, it's going to fluctuate between water weight and a bunch of other factors. It might go up and down every day, but try and take like a weekly average over maybe 2 weeks, and you'll see where that maintenance is. I recommend using Chronometer for that. It's probably the most accurate of all the free software or applications that you can use to track your calories. And I also recommend getting a kitchen scale as well. It's going to make things a whole lot easier. And it's pretty hard to lose weight in a methodical manner if you don't have an accurate way to measure what you're eating, so highly recommend a kitchen scale. And now that you've got that, the main point of this video is just to take 300 calories off of your maintenance. So if you're eating 3,000 at your maintenance, 2,700. And I would say stick to that for, it depends what your current weight is. If you're already quite lean, or reasonably lean, I wouldn't recommend cutting for too long, maybe only 6 weeks. Some of the people within bodybuilding, you know, cut very hard. I find that a little bit silly unless you're actually trying to compete in a bodybuilding competition, but that's not that many people. Because if you're already lean and you're trying to get even more lean, say like 8% body fat, you're probably just going to tax your performance. You know, you might look great for, you know, a short period of time, but I don't know if it's that worth it. Your strength is going to fall off. It's going to be hard to maintain fitness and gym performance, training performance, whatever you're training for. So I don't recommend doing it for too long. If you are, you know, if you're not that lean at all, then of course you can do it for quite a bit longer, maybe like 2-3 months. But again, I wouldn't recommend doing this for too long. There seems to be a culture with cutting for an extended period of time and just getting as lean as possible. The only thing that matters is being in a deficit and restricting calories. I always want to prioritize making sure your training is good, because when that's good, you're, you know, and your sleep as well. Because when those things are in check, which are hard to do in a steep calorie deficit, everything really falls apart, and you're putting so much time into fitness, but you're not actually in good health. So at that point, you know, what's the point? So this is my justification for timing. And as far as other factors go, a lot of people are very precise when cutting with the carbs and fat split. I don't think it's that important either. Of course, fat is 9 calories per gram, whereas carbs is 4 calories per gram, which means you can probably eat more fat without filling up, and eat higher calories with higher fat. So some people like to restrict fat. That's fine. Just don't restrict it too much, because then you risk crashing your hormones. And if your, say, testosterone levels are dropping, then everything becomes harder again. It's harder to train. Or your progress in the gym is, you know, going to fall apart. So I wouldn't recommend dropping your fats anywhere below like 60 grams per day. And the other big hitter is protein, right? Some people say 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. If you're doing kilos, you can probably do a bit less. 1 per pound is quite a bit. I'd say 1.8 to 2 is, you know, top of the range of protein, which is what you want to do if you're cutting, because otherwise, if your protein is low, you're going to atrophy quite a bit, and you're going to lose some fat, but also a moderate amount of muscle as well. And the same thing goes for sleep quality. If you're not sleeping properly, the scientific literature actually shows you're going to atrophy a lot of your muscle. and instead of the fat, which is interesting. So we really want to prioritize your protein intake and your sleep. They have a similar effect when you're trying to actually lose weight. If they're in check, then you'll lose a lot more a lot more fat than you will muscle, which is what we're after, right? And as far as managing training, we want to make sure we're not overtraining, right? If you're on lower calories, it can be quite easy to get yourself in a bit of a hole if you're training a lot harder than your calories are allowing you to do. For example, it's quite easy to train if you're on high calorie, and the inverse is true as well. And it might be a little bit harder to train as well, but it's important that you do get a decent bit of carbs in before your session. Try and aim for at least 50 grams of carbs 1 to 2 hours before to really get the most out of your session, particularly because if you're cutting your glycogen stores, which is your stored carbs, are going to be a bit lower because they're not really getting topped up as much because you're in a deficit. So be sure to allocate some of your carbs right before training, ideally. So those are the main things you need to know, and there's also a few other tips that can just make the whole process a little bit easier. The first one would be, well, it's really up to you whether or not you want to do intermittent fasting, which basically just means 16 hours fasted, 8 hours eating. So maybe you just eat from like midday to 8 p.m. This works in theory, and it does work for some people. I enjoy, just having that clarity in the morning when you're fasted, but an issue is if you're fasting for a lot of the day, this usually means your meals are a bit bigger, and because they're bigger, your stomach gets temporarily a bit stretched out, which makes it easier to eat more and harder to fill up. So for some people, it can actually make it harder to stay on calories counterintuitively. But if it works for you, great, because there's nothing fundamentally wrong with fasting. As far as making the food feel a bit more filling, fiber is going to be an ideal one. Fiber is technically a carb, but we don't really get energy from it the same way. It more so goes to our gut bacteria, and we don't really digest it like other carbs. So it can also be quite filling, despite there being fundamentally no calories for us. So that's ideal. So ideally eating a lot of whole foods, plant foods. Not that there's anything wrong with meat, but plant foods are always going to be higher in protein, particularly whole grain stuff. Your brown rice and pasta is going to be a lot more filling than the white alternatives for cutting. And in general, eating lower processed foods is going to just help as well. Things like meats and, again, higher fiber stuff are always just going to be a lot more filling than processed foods. If you're trying to dirty bulk, for example, it's going to be easier to get calories if you're eating processed. So avoid that sort of thing. You'll generally just be in better health as well. As well, if you're eating less calories, that means less opportunity for micronutrients. So you want to make sure the foods that are still in your diet are micronutrient dense so you don't end up deficient in anything. This goes as well for sugary foods. It can be easy to rack up a lot of calories via sugar just because it's sweet, it's nice, it's easy to eat a lot of it. So lowering that will help as well. Sugar is a carb, it's 4 calories per gram like anything else, but the difference is our gut microbiome won't actually eat it. And our gut microbiome will eat about 20% of our total calorie intake, which means if your sugar is 4 calories per gram, but your gut's not touching it, it kind of makes it around 5 calories per gram if you do the math. Maybe just short of 5, which is interesting. Of course, it's not that big of a increase, but it's something to keep note of as well. It's just, easy to rack up high calories with high sugar. Lastly, caffeine. Caffeine will bump up your metabolic rate, and it will make it a little easier to blunt your hunger and stay full throughout the day. But you don't want to overdo this. It can be used as a tool, but if you're overdoing it and you're having high doses, particularly in the afternoon and evenings, it's going to make sleep bad. And if you remember what I said earlier, if your sleep's terrible, then it makes weight loss harder again. So just be a little bit cautious there. Don't let it get too out of hand. Lastly, hydration. Hydration is always helpful, right? But with weight loss as well, if you're struggling to keep to that calorie deficit, it can help because some of your hunger can be, misidentified as thirst and vice versa. So sometimes you're very hungry, but your body is just craving water instead, and you don't really realize it. So that's important too. And if you have a lot of water, particularly during your meals, it can help fill up your stomach a bit. So you feel full after your meal because there's a bit of water in your stomach still. It'll sit around in there for maybe 20 minutes. So that's a little tip as well. And all of that's pretty much the basics, what you need to know if you're trying to lose weight. So again, to recap, 300 calorie deficit, Don't do it for too long, and make sure your protein intake and your sleep is in check. That's most of what I wanted to talk about today, so hope you learned something. I'll see you next time.